A torn yearbook found after 21 years reveals the fate of a missing teen. The air in the attic was a physical weight, thick with the ghosts of forgotten things. 21 years of dust motes danced like frantic spirits in the single jaundiced beam of a bare bulb hanging from a rafter. David Chen, his shirt already sticking to his back in the oppressive July heat, pried open another cardboard box. The groan of the flaps was the sound of a past he'd sealed away, a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. His parents were downsizing, moving to a condo in Florida. And this final archaeological dig through his own history was the price of their sunny retirement. He coughed, the dust acrid in his throat. Inside the box, nestled between a deflated football and a stack of comic books whose heroes had long been eclipsed by mortgages and quarterly reports, was the book. Northwood High School, class of 2003. The howler. He lifted it out, the glossy blue cover surprisingly cool against his sweat-slicked hands. He hadn't thought about this place in years, hadn't wanted to. High school was a 4-year sentence he'd served, and then promptly commuted from his memory. He ran a thumb over the embossed silver wolf on the cover, its head thrown back. In a silent cry, a wave of something unsettling, a phantom limb of teenage anxiety, prickled his skin. He almost put it back, almost sealed the box, and marked it for the dump. But some morbid curiosity, the same impulse that makes you slow down for a car crash, made him sit back on his haunches and open it. The inside cover was a chaotic Pollock of signatures. A frantic graffiti of well-wishes and inside jokes that were now as foreign as hieroglyphics. Dave, stay cool. From a guy whose face he couldn't place. HAGS. Have a great summer. The universal sign-off of people you'd never speak to again. He grimaced, the forced nostalgia tasting like ash in his mouth. He was 38, a corporate lawyer with a thinning hairline and an ex-wife. The boy in these pages was an alien. He began to flip through, the stiff, heavy pages whispering against each other. There was the chess club, a collection of pale, awkward boys trying to look intellectual. The drama club, frozen mid-pose in a cloud of melodramatic angst. And then, the jocks. The football team. A full 2-page spread, bathed in the golden light of hero worship. There they were, the kings of Northwood, invincible in their padded armor. In the center, smiling a smile that never quite reached his eyes, was Coach Marcus Albright. Even then, in his late 40s, he had the coiled energy of a predator, a charisma that was almost physically aggressive. The town had worshipped him. He'd turned a losing team into state champions. He was more than a coach, he was a monument. David's finger traced the edge of the photo. A coldness seeping into his skin that had nothing to do with the attic's temperature. He kept flipping, a knot tightening in his stomach. He was looking for someone, though he wasn't sure why. His own face appeared, a deer-in-the headlights portrait of a boy drowning in his own oversized shirt. He cringed and turned the page. Faster. And that's when he saw it. It was near the back, in the candid section, where candid moments were anything but. It was a page that had been torn violently. A ragged, angry gash ran vertically down the paper, but the person who'd done it hadn't finished the job. The bottom corner of the page still clung to the binding, a stubborn witness. It created a pocket, a secret fold in the book's manufactured history. And sticking out from that tier, just a millimeter of faded, folded notebook paper, was something that didn't belong. His heart gave a strange, painful lurch. It was an instinctual reaction, a primal alarm bell ringing deep in his gut. His hands, which drafted 100-page contracts without a tremor, suddenly felt clumsy and numb. He carefully, so carefully, worked his finger into the tier, the old paper of the yearbook threatening to crumble. He pinched the folded note and slid it out. It was a single sheet, ripped from a spiral notebook. The blue lines faded to a hazy gray. The paper was soft, almost cloth-like from age and pressure. It had been folded into a tiny, tight square, as if to make it as small and concealable as possible. As he unfolded it, the creases fought back, stubborn from 2 decades of compression. A faint, sweet smell, like dried flowers and cheap vanilla perfume, rose from the paper. It was a scent that punched him squarely in the chest. A scent he hadn't smelled in 21 years, but recognized with sickening, absolute certainty Leela's scent. The handwriting was a frantic, looping cursive, the letters slanting sharply. As if written in a desperate hurry, the ink, a girlish purple, was smudged in places, blurred by what could have been sweat or tears. He had to squint in the dim light to read it. "He won't let me leave. He said he'd ruin me. He has the photos, the tapes. He keeps them in the old boathouse. In his locker, Coach Albright. He's not who they think he is. He's a monster. I'm so scared. Don't let them forget me. Don't let him win." And then, at the bottom, just a single, heartbreaking initial L. The air evacuated David's lungs. The attic, the dust, the heat, it all vanished. He was falling, tumbling back through 21 years into the cold, black water of a memory he'd tried to drown. Leela Chen. No relation, but in a town the size of Northwood, they might as well have been siblings. She was the girl everyone noticed. Not because she was the prettiest, though she was beautiful in a way that seemed both fragile and fierce, but because she had a light inside her. A reckless, vibrant energy that made you feel more alive just by being near her. She painted, she wrote poetry, she argued with teachers, she laughed from her belly. She was everything David, in his quiet, invisible corner of the high school universe, was not. And in the spring of their senior year, she had vanished. One day she was there, her locker covered in band stickers and her own defiant artwork, and the next, she was gone. The official story, the one that settled over the town like a comforting blanket, was that she'd run away. She was a troubled girl, they whispered. Artistic, moody, prone to drama. Her mother was a mess, her father, long gone. It was easy to believe she'd just packed a bag and chased some Kerouac fantasy to the coast. The police made a cursory investigation, the principal gave a somber speech, and the town moved on, eager to excise the uncomfortable anomaly from its perfect, championship-winning year. But David had never quite believed it. Now holding this brittle, terrifying piece of paper, he knew why. Coach Albright. He's a monster. The words pulsed on the page, the purple ink like a fresh bruise. Coach Albright, the man who had a stadium named after him, the man who still lived in the same sprawling house on the hill, a local deity who judged the town's children by their throwing arms and their tolerance for pain. To accuse him was like accusing the sun of being cold. It was unthinkable, heretical. David's gaze lifted from the note, back to the torn yearbook. He looked at the half-ripped page. It was a photo montage of the senior prom. In the part of the page that remained, he could see couples dancing, their faces flushed with the cheap champagne. They'd snuck in, and on the torn dangling fragment, there was a single clear image. Lila, she wasn't smiling. She was standing by the punch bowl, her back to the wall, her beautiful prom dress, a shimmering silver thing, looking like armor she'd been forced to wear. Her arms were crossed tight against her chest, her knuckles white, and standing close to her, his hand on her arm, his thumb stroking the bare skin of her bicep in a gesture that was meant to look avuncular, but now looked chillingly possessive, was Coach Albright. His wife, a pale, nervous woman, was a few feet away, her back turned, talking to another teacher. The coach was leaning in, whispering something in Leela's ear, and the look on Leela's face. It wasn't sadness or anger, it was pure, unadulterated terror. The look of a trapped animal. The world tilted on its axis. The attic floor seemed to drop away beneath him. Who had torn this page? Who had seen this photo and tried to erase it from history? And who had saved this note? Was it Leela herself? In a final, desperate act, tucking her truth into the very book that celebrated her tormentor? Or was it someone else, a friend, an enemy, a silent witness who was too afraid to come forward? A memory, sharp and unwelcome as a shard of glass, pierced the fog of his shock. It was from the week before she disappeared. He'd been down by the river, skipping class to read his own small act of rebellion. He'd heard voices, angry and sharp, and he'd seen them. Leela and Coach Albright, standing by the old dilapidated boathouse the school used for storing rowing equipment. Lila was shouting, her voice cracking with a fury that David had never heard from her. Albright had grabbed her arm, his face a mask of cold, controlled rage. David had frozen, hidden behind a thicket of willows, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd told himself it was none of his business. A coach disciplining a student. He'd turned and walked away, the angry shouts fading behind him. He had buried that memory. For 21 years, he had buried it under law school, a failed marriage, and the relentless pursuit of billable hours. He had convinced himself it was nothing. He looked down at the note in his trembling hand. Don't let them forget me. It wasn't just a plea, it was a command, an indictment. A ghost's hand reaching out from a paper tomb, demanding a debt be paid. The dust motes in the air suddenly felt like a shroud, and the silence of the attic was no longer empty. It was filled with the unheard screams of a 17-year-old girl. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image of Leela's terrified face at the pram was burned onto the back of his eyelids. The feel of the note in his hand was like a live wire, a direct connection to her final, desperate hours. He, David Chen, the quiet boy, the invisible man, was now the sole custodian of a truth that could shatter a town, destroy a legend, and dredge up a horror that had been sleeping for 2 decades. His legal mind, usually so clear and methodical, was a maelstrom of panic and responsibility. This was evidence, a confession, a motive, but it was also a death sentence. To bring this forward was to declare war on a man who was practically royalty. Albright had connections, money, and a saintly reputation meticulously crafted over decades. And what did David have? A 21-year-old note from a runaway and a repressed memory he'd be forced to admit he'd hidden. They would crucify him. They would call him an opportunist, a liar, a parasite trying to smear a great man's name. They would say he was trying to cash in on an old tragedy. He felt a sudden violent urge to refold the note, shove it back into the tear, close the yearbook, and throw the entire box into the incinerator. He could walk away. He could go back to his clean, orderly, empty life. No one would ever know. Lila would remain a sad, romantic story, a ghost. But then he looked at her face again. Not the terrified one in the photo, but the one on her official senior portrait on page 84. Her head was tilted, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, seemed to look right at him, right through him. They were full of defiance, of art, of a life that refused to be ordinary, a life that had been stolen. Don't let them forget me. Don't let him win. The plea wasn't just about memory, it was about justice. The attic air grew cold, and the single bulb flickered overhead, casting long dancing shadows that looked like grasping fingers. David realized with a jolt of pure, undiluted fear that the past was never really gone. It was just waiting, folded, up in the dark, for the right person to find it. And God help him, he was the right person. He stood up, his legs unsteady, the yearbook in one hand and the fragile, explosive note in the other. He was no longer just cleaning out an attic. He was standing at the edge of a grave. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his girlfriend about dinner plans. The notification sound, so mundane, so much a part of his current life, was a profane intrusion. He ignored it. He walked over to the single dirty window at the far end of the attic and looked out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the colors of a fresh bruise. Below, the town of Northwood looked peaceful, idyllic. A perfect American town. A lie. The whole thing was a lie. And he was holding the proof. The cliffhanger wasn't just what he would do next. It was what the truth would do to all of them. The weight of it was immense, a crushing physical pressure on his chest. He had to tell someone, but who? The police. The same police force that had dismissed her as a runaway, a reporter. His mind reeled. Every option was a minefield. For the first time in his adult life, David Chen had no idea what to do. He only knew that the silence in the attic had ended, and the screaming was about to begin. He slid the note into his pocket, the fragile paper feeling as heavy as a tombstone. The yearbook felt obscene in his hands, a glossy, smiling lie. He had to know more. He had to understand how this happened, how everyone let it happen. His journey back into the past had just begun, and already he could feel its darkness pulling him under. The drive away from his parents' house was a blur. David didn't remember getting in his car, didn't remember the familiar turns that led back to the sterile quiet of his rented townhouse. He drove on autopilot, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the yearbook sitting on the passenger seat like an accuser. The note was in his shirt pocket, resting against his chest, a paper ghost, with a heartbeat of its own. He felt it with every breath, a constant, terrifying reminder. He parked in his driveway, but couldn't bring himself to get out of the car. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the suburban street was bathed in the cool blue light of twilight. Houses were lighting up, families gathering for dinner. A world of normal, oblivious life that felt a million miles away. He leaned his head back against the headrest, the leather cool against his feverish skin. He needed to think like a lawyer, objectively, dispassionately. Fact 1. Lila Chen disappeared in April 2003. Fact 2. The official explanation was that she ran away. Fact 3. He now possessed a handwritten note, purportedly from her, implicating Coach Marcus Albright in her disappearance, possibly her death. Fact 4. The note alleged blackmail involving photos and tapes stored in the old boathouse. Fact 5. He had a corroborating, albeit suppressed, memory of a heated argument between Lila and Albright at that exact location. Fact 6. A photograph of Albright with a terrified-looking Lila at the prom had been torn from the yearbook, suggesting a cover-up by an unknown party. He laid the facts out in his mind, but they offered no comfort, no clear path forward. This wasn't a case file. It was a wound, his own, and the town's. Reopening it would mean salt, and lots of it. Who were the key players in this resurrected tragedy? He closed his eyes, forcing himself back to the suffocating ecosystem of Northwood High. First, there was Lila, the artist, the poet, the girl who wore combat boots with a sundress and didn't care what anyone thought. But that was the facade, wasn't it? The note revealed a different Lila, a girl who was terrified, trapped, blackmailed. What had Albright held over her? Photos, tapes. The words were ugly, squirming things. In 2003, digital cameras were common, but social media wasn't the beast. It is now a physical photo, a VHS tape. Those things could be controlled, hidden, used as leverage with devastating precision. What could a 17-year-old girl have done that was so terrible a powerful man could use it to cage her? Her father had left when she was 10, and her mother, Eleanor, was a wraith. A woman who drifted through the grocery store with a permanent look of apology on her face. Lila had been her mother's protector, her fierce defender. Maybe the secret wasn't even Lila's. Maybe Albright had found a way to threaten her through her fragile mother. The thought made David feel sick. Then there was the antagonist, Coach Albright. The man was a master of public relations before the term was common. He was the perfect soundbite, always talking about character, discipline, and building men. He hosted a summer football camp for underprivileged kids. He and his wife chaired the hospital charity gala every year. He was untouchable. David tried to picture him as a monster, but the image wouldn't stick. All he could see was the man on the sidelines, his jaw tight with concentration, his eyes scanning the field, a god in a tracksuit. He was a man who exuded power, but it was a paternalistic power, the kind the town craved. He was the town's father figure, and what he was being accused of was a patricide of the soul. To unmask him would be to orphan the town's identity. David's mind raced, searching for other faces in the crowd. Who else was in that orbit of power? Who could have been a witness? His eyes snapped open. Of course, there was one other person, the third point in the toxic triangle of high school royalty, Mark Redfield, star quarterback, golden boy, Albright's prize creation. Mark was the sun around which Northwood High revolved. He had the perfect hair, the easy smile, the car his dad bought him for getting a B in algebra. He and Albright were inseparable. It was a relationship that went beyond player and coach. Albright molded him, mentored him, paraded him around like a prize stallion. He was the son the coach never had, a phrase repeated ad nauseum in the local paper. And for a brief tumultuous period in the fall of their senior year, Mark Redfield had dated Lila Chen. It had been a strange, magnetic pairing. The jock and the artist, the king and the rebel. David remembered the whispers in the hallway, the shock that someone like Lila would fall for someone like Mark. Their relationship was a supernova, burning impossibly bright and then collapsing just as quickly. It lasted maybe 3 months. The breakup was public and ugly. Shouting matches in the parking lot, a slammed locker. Lila had thrown a can of soda at Mark's Letterman jacket in the middle of the cafeteria. After that, she'd withdrawn, retreated, back into her shell of art and sarcasm, but with a new, harder edge. A haunted look. David now understood. Mark was Albright's golden boy. If the coach was doing something monstrous, something criminal, Mark would have been there. He would have been the first line of defense, the loyal soldier. Or would he? David remembered Mark as arrogant, entitled, but not evil. He was a product of the system, not its architect. What if he saw something? What if he knew? And then, the fourth person. The silent one. The one who tore the page. Who was it? It had to be someone who knew. Someone who understood the significance of that photo, who wanted it gone. But they hadn't thrown the yearbook away. They'd kept it, and they hadn't removed the note. Was it a moment of conscience? A flicker of guilt? Or had they simply not seen it, tucked so deep into the tear? David finally got out of the car, the yearbook clutched in his hand like a shield. He went inside, the silence of his house, a stark contrast to the roaring in his head. He walked past the kitchen, past the living room, and went straight to his office. He laid the yearbook on his large mahogany desk, the blue cover looking juvenile and profane against the dark, polished wood. He opened it again, to the torn page, to Lila's terrified face. He needed to find them. He needed to find Mark Redfield. And he needed to find Lila's mother, Eleanor, if she was even still alive. And what about Albright's wife? What did she know? What did she choose not to see? He pulled out his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A quick search for Marcus Albright was easy. He was still in Northwood, now retired, a living legend. He'd stepped down as coach 5 years ago after a minor heart scare, but a bronze statue of him had been erected outside the new football stadium. There were photos of the dedication ceremony. The governor was there. Albright stood, hand on the statue's shoulder, smiling that same reptilian smile. His wife stood beside him, looking smaller and more faded than ever. Next, he searched for Mark Redfield. It was harder. The name was common. But David remembered Mark's father owned the biggest car dealership in the county, Redfield Automotive. A few clicks later, he found him. Mark had taken over the family business. There he was, on the dealership's website, standing in front of a row of gleaming SUVs. He was thicker now, his perfect hair receding, but the smile was the same. The easy, confident grin of a man who had never known a day of real struggle. In his life, he was married, 3 kids, a pillar of the community, just like his mentor. He was on the board of the local bank. He coached his son's Pee-wee football team. He had built a perfect life on the foundations of his high school glory. A glory that was inextricably linked to Coach Albright. Finally, with a sense of dread, he searched for Eleanor Chen. He found her obituary. She had passed away 6 years ago. Cancer. The small online notice mentioned she was preceded in death by her husband and survived by the memory of her beloved daughter, Lila. The wording was heartbreaking. The memory of her daughter. Not even the pretense of hope that she might still be out there somewhere. Eleanor had died knowing, in her heart, that her daughter was gone forever. Had she suspected the truth? Or had the uncertainty eaten away at her until there was nothing left? The obituary listed no other family. The line ended with her. Another dead end, another silent witness. So it was just him, and Mark, and Albright, a trinity of ghosts and gatekeepers. David leaned back, the leather of his office chair creaking. This wasn't just about finding a killer anymore. It was about excavating a history that had been deliberately buried. The conflict wasn't just between a man and a monster, it was between a town's cherished myth and a girl's forgotten scream. He picked up his phone. His fingers hovered over the numbers for the Northwood Police Department. He could make the call right now, turn over the note, the yearbook, let them handle it. But the image of the smiling cops in the local paper, shaking Albright's hand at the statue dedication, flashed in his mind. They wouldn't investigate their patron saint based on a 21-year-old note, they would bury it. Deeper, this time, no, he couldn't go to them. Not yet, he had to go to the source. He had to go to the other witness, the hidden one. He found the number for Redfield Automotive. He knew what he had to do. He had to face Mark Redfield. He had to look the golden boy in the eye and see if there was any tarnish left from that dark spring. He had to rattle the perfect cage Mark had built for himself and see what fell out. It was a reckless, dangerous plan. Mark had everything to lose by dredging this up. He would be hostile, defensive. He might even go straight to Albright, but it was the only move David had. He had to find the fault lines in the official story, and Mark Redfield was the biggest one. Before he could lose his nerve, he pressed the call button. The line began to ring, each ring a hammer blow against the silence, a step closer to a confrontation 21 years in the making. He didn't know what he would say, but he knew he had to start. For Lila, the ringing stopped. A polished, professional, female voice answered. Redfield Automotive. This is Sarah, how can I help you? David's throat was dry. I'd like to speak to Mark Redfield, please. The dealership was a cathedral of chrome and glass. Sunlight glinted off the hoods of a dozen oversized trucks and SUVs, each one polished to an aggressive, almost painful sheen. The air smelled of new car plastic and cheap coffee. David felt out of place in his simple slacks and button-down, a drab bird in a flock of peacocks. He told the receptionist his name and that Mark was expecting him. He wasn't, but David had learned in his years as a lawyer that a confident lie is often more effective than a tentative truth. He didn't have to wait long. A door at the back of the showroom opened, and Mark Redfield emerged. He was older, heavier. The golden boy glow replaced by the ruddy complexion of a man who enjoyed his steak dinners. But the charisma was still there, an aura of casual command that made the salesman stand a little straighter as he passed. He walked toward David, his hand outstretched, a politician's smile already in place. David Chen, my God, man, it's been forever. What are you doing back in this old town? His voice was a smooth, practiced baritone, the voice of a man used to closing deals. His handshake was firm, confident, too confident. My parents are moving, David said, his own voice sounding thin and reedy by comparison. Just clearing out the old place, right, the Chen's up on Maple Street. Good people, Mark said, already steering David toward his office. So, a lawyer in the big city, huh? I heard. Must be something. Me, I'm just slinging cars. Keeping the dream alive, you know? His office was exactly what David expected. Large, imposing desk, leather chairs. On the wall behind him was a shrine to his past. Framed photos of him in his Northwood uniform, frozen in a perfect throwing motion. A team photo, the whole squad grinning, with Coach Albright standing in the middle, his arm around Mark's shoulders like a proud father, and in a smaller, silver frame on the corner of his desk, a photo of his perfect family. Blonde wife, 3 smiling children. The American dream, bought and paid for. So, Mark said, sinking into his chair and gesturing for David to take the one opposite. What can I do for you, Dave? You looking for a new ride? I can give you the old buddy discount. He winked. David didn't smile. He reached into the leather satchel he'd brought and pulled out the yearbook. He placed it on the desk between them. The blue cover looked garish and out of place on the polished wood. Mark's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He looked at the book, then back at David, his eyes narrowing. The howler, Jesus. Haven't seen one of those in years. What, you bringing it around for signatures? The joke fell flat. A nervous tick. I found it in my attic, David said, his voice low and steady. He watched Mark's face carefully, looking for a crack in the facade. It's a funny thing, memory, what you forget, and what you force yourself to forget. Mark shifted in his chair, the leathery protest loud in the quiet room. Look, Dave, if this is about some old high school grudge, I'm not interested. We were kids, we were, David agreed. But some things don't stay in the past. He opened the yearbook, his fingers tracing the edge of the cover before he flipped it open. He didn't go to the torn page, not yet. He went to the football team spread, state champs. You guys were gods. Mark visibly relaxed. This was familiar territory. Yeah, he said, a genuine smile returning. That was a hell of a year. Coach Albright, he was a genius. He pushed us harder than we thought we could be pushed. He made us winners. He made you, David corrected softly. You were his project, weren't you? The question hung in the air. Mark's eyes went cold. He was my coach. And my mentor. He's a great man. He did more for this town than anyone. He did a lot for you, David pressed. Got you that scholarship to state, didn't he? Even after your grades started slipping that spring. Mark's jaw tightened. What is this, Chen? What do you want? I want to talk about Leela, David said, his voice barely a whisper. The name landed like a stone in a silent pool. Every ounce of practiced charm, of salesman swagger, drained from Mark's face. He looked older, suddenly, tired. The golden boy was gone, replaced by a middle-aged man with a secret. What about her? He asked, his voice a low growl. She ran away. David said. That was the story. Yeah, that was the story. Mark's eyes darted to the photos on the wall, then back to the yearbook. He wouldn't meet David's gaze. Funny thing, David continued, his heart hammering in his chest. He was walking on a wire, and the fall was a long way down. I was flipping through this, my copy, and I found something. He turned the pages slowly, deliberately, until he reached the torn page of the prem. He laid it flat on the desk. Mark stared at it. His face was a mask of stone, but David could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. He saw the ragged tear, the dangling fragment with the picture of him, his date, laughing. In the background, while in the foreground, his mentor held a terrified Leela Chen in his grip. It was torn, David said. Almost like someone didn't want anyone to see this picture. But they missed something. He reached into his pocket. His hand was shaking now, but he didn't care. He pulled out the folded note. He let it sit in his palm, for a moment, then carefully unfolded it and placed it on the yearbook. Right next to Leela's terrified face, Mark's eyes dropped to the faded purple ink. David watched as he read the words. He saw the color drain from Mark's face, leaving his skin a pasty, sickly gray. He saw his breath hitch in his chest. He saw his hands clench into fists on the arms of his chair. He saw recognition, and he saw fear. A deep, profound, 21-year-old fear. Mark looked up from the note, his eyes wide, frantic. The mask was gone, shattered. David was looking at the boy from 2003. The boy who stood by and did nothing. Where did you get this? Mark whispered, his voice hoarse. It was in the book, David said. Tucked inside the tier, waiting. Mark shook his head, a gesture of pure denial. No, this is impossible. He looked around his office, at the pictures of his perfect life, as if seeing it all for the first time, seeing how fragile it all was. What did he have on her, Mark? David asked, his voice soft but relentless. The note says, photos, tapes. Is that why you broke up with her? Did the coach tell you to? Did he show you something? Mark shot to his feet, knocking his chair back. Get out, he snarled, his voice raw with panic. Get out of my office, you have no idea what you're doing. You're going to destroy everything. She was 17, David said, standing to face him. She was my friend. And yours. He didn't just ruin her, did he, Mark? He did more than that. The boathouse. What happened at the boathouse? Mark flinched as if he'd been struck. I don't know anything, he stammered, backing away toward the door. She was a mess, she was crazy, she made things up. He was reciting a script, a story he'd been told, a story he'd told himself for 2 decades, but his eyes betrayed him. "Look at me," Mark David said, his voice rising. "Look at me, and tell me she was lying." Mark wouldn't. He fumbled for the doorknob, his hand shaking. "You bring this up, you go after him. He'll crush you, Chen, he'll crush you, and he'll crush me. He's not just some old man. He is this town. You don't know what he's capable of, but you do," David said. "You've always known." The door flew open. "Get out," Mark roared, his face contorted in a mask of rage and terror. A salesman in the showroom turned to look, his eyes wide. David slowly gathered the note and the yearbook. He didn't break eye contact with Mark. He saw it all there, in the quarterback's haunted eyes. The guilt, the complicity, the cowardice. Mark Redfield wasn't just a witness, he was a co-conspirator in the silence. He was the first soldier in Albright's army, and his first duty had been to abandon Leela. "This isn't over," David said quietly. He walked out of the office, past the gawking salesman, through the cathedral of chrome and glass, and into the harsh, bright sunlight. His car was no longer a sanctuary. It was a command center. The conversation had been a brutal, ugly success. He hadn't gotten a confession, but he had gotten confirmation. Mark was terrified. And terrified men make mistakes. As he drove away, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Is this David Chen?" The voice was old, thin, reedy, a woman's voice, trembling with age or fear. "Yes, who is this?" There was a shaky breath on the other end of the line. "My name is Helen Albright," the voice said. "I was Marcus's wife. I heard you were in town. I saw you at the dealership. Please, we need to talk. There's something you need to know. Something I should have said a long time ago." The injustice of it was a physical thing. A sickness that started in David's gut and spread through his veins like ice water. It wasn't just that Lila had been hurt, that she had been erased. It was that her erasure had been the foundation for so much success, so much celebrated glory. Albright's statue, Mark's dealership, the town's pride, it was all built on the bedrock of a teenage girl's silenced scream. The system hadn't just failed her, it had profited from her destruction. And now, the system was beginning to fight back. He met Helen Albright in a small, forgotten park on the edge of town, a place of peeling paint and overgrown weeds. She chose the location. She'd arrived on foot, wearing a headscarf and oversized sunglasses, a woman accustomed to hiding. She looked a decade older than her 70-odd years, her body stooped, her hands trembling as they clutched a worn leather handbag. She was the ghost at the feast, the silent partner in the town's grand myth, and the guilt had hollowed her out. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. She wouldn't look at him directly, her eyes scanning the empty playground as if expecting ambush. "I saw you leave Mark's office. He called Marcus right after you left. I was there. I heard the panic in his voice." "What did he say?" David asked, keeping his own voice calm, gentle. She was a frightened animal. Any sudden move would make her bolt. He told him a ghost had come back. That you'd found ... something, a note. She finally looked at him, her eyes behind the dark glasses, swimming with a potent mixture of terror and desperation. "Is it true? Did she write something down?" David just nodded, watching her. A dry, ragged sob escaped her lips. "I knew it," she whispered. "I always knew she wouldn't have gone silently. She wasn't built for silence." Helen fumbled in her handbag, her shaking fingers struggling with the clasp. She finally pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. "He gave this to me. Marcus, our first anniversary. I'm supposed to be buried with it." She opened the clasp. Inside, there were no smiling photos of a happy couple. There was just a tiny folded piece of paper. "I should have burned it. Lord, I tried to, but I couldn't." She handed it to David. It was a photograph, a cheap instant photo, faded and creased. It showed a young Leela, no older than 16, asleep on a couch. She was fully clothed, but vulnerable, her face slack with sleep. And standing behind the couch, looking down at her, was Coach Albright. He wasn't smiling, he was just looking. And the look in his eyes. It was the look of a collector appraising a new acquisition. A look of cold, absolute ownership. On the back, in Albright's sharp, aggressive handwriting, were 2 words, "My prodigy." He took pictures of all his special boys, Helen said, her voice flat, dead. The ones he was grooming for greatness. He called it documenting their potential. He had albums full of them. Mark Redfield, the quarterback before him, but Leela, she was different. She wasn't one of his boys. She was, a challenge. He was obsessed with her mind, her defiance. He said he wanted to break her, not to destroy her, but to remake her into something that understood true discipline. His discipline, the park seemed to spin around David. The depravity of it was deeper, more twisted than he could have imagined. It wasn't just lust, it was about power. Absolute soul-crushing power. He started by grooming her, offering her a spot in an exclusive summer writing program that didn't exist. Helen continued, her words tumbling out now, a confession held back for 2 decades. He told her he could make her famous, that he had connections. He preyed on her ambition, and then he started the sessions. In the boathouse, he would record them, just talking. He'd provoke her, push her, get her to admit her fears, her secrets. He was mapping her soul so he could dismantle it. The photos came later. When she started to pull away, he showed her what he had. The tapes of her confessing her family's secrets, her mother's depression. He threatened to send them to the Child Protective Services, to have her mother institutionalized and Leela put in foster care. He trapped her. The cruelty was breathtaking in its precision. He hadn't used a fist. He'd used her own love for her mother as a weapon against her. David's phone buzzed. A text. It was from a number he didn't recognize. You're playing with fire, Mr. Chen. Some fires are meant to burn everything down. Walk away. This is your only warning. He showed the screen to Helen. She recoiled, her face ashen. That's Mark, she whispered. He's protecting him. He's always protected him. The threat didn't scare David, it enraged him. The injustice was no longer a historical fact. It was an active, escalating conspiracy. The system was waking up, its tentacles reaching out to crush the threat. He looked at the frail, broken woman. Beside him, she was a victim, too, a prisoner in a golden cage for more than half her life. Why now, Helen? He asked gently. Why tell me this now? Because Marcus is dying, she said, the words stark and terrible in the quiet park. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors give him 6 months. He's trying to get his affairs in order, to cement his legacy. He's donating his archives to the town, historical society, the photo albums, the tapes, everything. He's going to sanitize it, frame it as his life's work as a mentor. He's going to bury what he did to that girl forever, bury it under a mountain of public goodwill. I can't let him do that. I can't let him die a saint. The audacity was stunning. Albright wasn't just covering his tracks, he was trying to turn his crimes into a monument. This was the escalating conflict, a race against time, against a dying man's final, desperate act of manipulation. That night, David's car had a brick thrown through the windshield. Tucked under a shard of safety glass was another note, this one typed. Second warnings are for losers. Just like Leela, the police were useless. Probably just kids, the bored-looking officer said, kicking at the glass on David's driveway. Lot of vandalism this time of year. He took a cursory report, his eyes lingering on David's expensive suit, his out-of-town license plates. David was an outsider, a troublemaker. The officer's loyalty was to the town, to the established order. To Coach Albright, the escalation was brutal and swift. The next day, David received a call from his firm's senior partner in the city. David, what the hell is going on down there? His boss demanded. I just got a call from the CEO of First National Bank of Northwood. He sits on their board with Mark Redfield. He said, "You're harassing one of their most respected clients, digging up old, baseless rumors." He strongly suggested that if our firm values their business, we'd call our dog off. What is this about? David was being squeezed. They were attacking his livelihood, his reputation. The message was clear. This town protects its own. You are not one of us. The fear was real now, a cold knot in his stomach. But Lila's face, the one from the yearbook, the defiant one, was burned in his mind. Don't let him win. He knew he couldn't fight them on their turf. He couldn't use the law, not when they owned it. He couldn't use the press, not when the local paper was practically Albright's personal newsletter. He had to find something they couldn't control, something they couldn't spin. He had to find the one thing Albright believed was his ultimate source of power and turn it into the instrument of his destruction. He had to find the tapes. Helen had said they were in the boathouse in his locker, but that was 21 years ago. They wouldn't still be there. Albright was arrogant, but not stupid. No, he'd have them somewhere safe. Somewhere he could access them, gloat over them. His archives, the ones he was donating to the Historical Society, he wouldn't have destroyed them. A monster like Albright would never destroy his trophies. The Historical Society was a small, dusty building next to the town library. David did a little digging. The Society's president was a man named Arthur Gable, a retired history teacher who worshipped the ground Albright walked on. He would never allow David access. It was time to stop playing by the rules. David thought back to his youth, to the boy who read books by the river instead of going to class. He hadn't been a jock, but he hadn't been a complete nerd either. He'd had one particular skill, born of teenage boredom and a desire to go places. He wasn't supposed to. He knew how to pick locks. It was a useless, juvenile talent he hadn't thought about in decades. Until now, that night, dressed in black, a small set of tension wrenches and picks in his pocket, David felt a strange sense of coming full circle. He was no longer a lawyer. He was a teenage delinquent again, breaking the rules for a cause he believed in. He parked a block away from the Historical Society and slipped through the shadows. The building was dark, the street deserted. The lock on the back door was old, a simple pin tumbler. His hands were stiff, clumsy at first, but the old muscle memory was there. The feel of the pins, the slight give of the tension wrench, the satisfying click as the cylinder turned. He was in. The inside of the Society smelled of old paper and lemon polish. Display cases held farming equipment from the 1800s and faded letters from Civil War soldiers. He used a penlight to navigate, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. In the back office, he found it. A new-looking filing cabinet, metal and imposing, completely out of place with the antique furniture. It had a high-security lock, far beyond his skill to pick. But on the desk next to it was a calendar. And on today's date, a note in a spidery hand. Meeting with Marcus Aree, collection transfer. 2 p.m., Albright was moving the evidence. He was preparing it for its final entombment as a historical artifact. David felt a surge of panic. He was running out of time. He scanned the office, desperate, and then he saw it. A small key, attached to a large wooden tag, hanging on a hook by the door. On the tag was one word: archives. Gable was so trusting, so in awe of his hero, he hadn't even bothered to hide the key. His hands shaking, David unlocked the cabinet. It was filled with dozens of cardboard storage boxes. Each one was meticulously labeled in Albright's sharp, aggressive script. Redfield, M. 1999 to 2003, Peterson, J. 1995 to 1999. It was a library of stolen souls, and then, at the very back, a single box, set apart from the others. It didn't have a name on it, it just had one word: Phoenix. His blood ran cold. Lila had loved mythology. She had a small tattoo of a phoenix on her shoulder, a symbol of rebirth she'd gotten on a rebellious trip to the city. It was a detail only a few people knew, a detail Albright had twisted into a sick, private joke. With trembling fingers, David lifted the lid. It wasn't full of photos, it was full of cassette tapes, dozens of them. Each one labeled with a date from the fall and winter of 2002 and the spring of 2003. And at the bottom, under the tapes, was a small leather-bound diary. He opened the diary. It was Lila's. Her handwriting, the same looping cursive from the note, filled the pages. It started as a regular diary, full of sketches, poems, complaints about her mother. But then the tone shifted. It became darker, more frantic. She wrote about the sessions with the coach. October 17th, he said he saw a darkness in me that he could turn into light. He said all great artists are born from pain, and he was going to be my crucible. It sounded so profound. I felt so special. November 12th, the questions are getting stranger. He wants to know everything about my father, about my mom. He says he needs to understand the source material. It feels less like mentoring and more like an interrogation. Mark thinks I'm lucky. He says the coach only invests this much time in the ones who are destined for greatness. January 22nd. I saw the pictures today. Of me, of other people. He keeps them in albums. Like a family history. He told me I was part of his legacy now. When I tried to end the sessions, he just smiled. He said a phoenix doesn't get to decide when it stays in the ashes. He decides. He told me what he would do to my mum if I walked away. I'm trapped. March 4th. He wants more now. The talking isn't enough. He says for the final act of transformation, there has to be a physical component, a surrender. He says it's the only way to truly kill the weak girl I am so the artist can be. Born, I'm scared. I told Mark a little bit, and he told me I was being dramatic. He told me not to piss off the coach, not when his scholarship is on the line. He chose him. He chose the coach over me. The final entry was dated April 14th. The day before she vanished. He's taking me to the boathouse tonight. He said it's time for me to be reborn. I don't think I'm coming back. I left a note. I hid it. It's a stupid, hopeless gesture, but it's all I have left. If anyone finds this, know that Marcus Albright is a murderer. He didn't just kill me. He devoured me, piece by piece. My name is Leela Chen. Please, don't let me disappear. David sank to the floor, the diary in his hands, the cold weight of the tapes pressing in around him. This was it. The entire conspiracy, laid bare in a dead girl's handwriting. He had her voice. He had her story. This was the plot twist he'd been searching for, the clue that could change everything. It was no longer his word against the legends, it was Leela's own voice, reaching out from the grave. He grabbed the diary and as many of the tapes as he could carry. As he slipped back out into the night, the weight in his bag was no longer a burden. It was a weapon. The game had changed. This wasn't about personal pain anymore. It was about to become a public execution. The plan formed in his mind with the cold, brutal clarity of a legal argument. A courtroom, a press conference, those were Albright's arenas. He controlled the narrative there. David had to choose a different venue, one where the raw, undeniable truth could not be spun or sanitized. He needed a stage where the whole town would be watching, a place so sacred to Albright's myth that to defile it would be an act of symbolic regicide. He needed to take the fight to the temple, the Marcus Albright Stadium. The annual Kickoff Classic was in 3 days. It was the biggest event of the year in Northwood, the ceremonial start to the football season. The whole town would be there. They were dedicating a new scoreboard that night, and the guest of honor, the man who would flip the switch, was Coach Albright himself. It would be his last major public appearance, his victory lap before he succumbed to his illness, his apotheosis into sainthood. It was the perfect stage for a crucifixion. David worked with a feverish intensity he hadn't felt in years. He called in favors. He found a tech-savvy kid who'd done some freelance work for his firm, a hacker who owed him for keeping a juvenile indiscretion off his record. The kid's name was Seth, and he lived on energy drinks and a diet of pure cynicism. "You want to what?" Seth asked over the encrypted line, a grin in his voice. "You want to hijack the Jumbotron at a high school football game and play audio from a 20-year-old cassette tape. That is the most beautifully, epically old-school revenge plot I have ever heard. I am so in. For 48 hours, they worked. David rented a cheap cassette player and painstakingly digitized the audio from Leela's tapes. The sound quality was poor, full of hiss and static, but her voice was there, clear and terrified. And so was Albright's, smooth, predatory, full of twisted psychological jargon. Pain is a catalyst, Lila, don't you see? The girl you are must die, so the artist can live. I am the architect of your rebirth. David listened to the tapes for hours, his stomach churning. He was a lawyer. He was supposed to be immune to the horrors of the human condition. But this was different. This was the slow, methodical murder of a soul, captured on magnetic tape. He paired the audio with images. He scanned pages from Lila's diary, the frantic handwriting, a visual testament to her terror. He used the photo Helen had given him, the one of Albright looking down at a sleeping Lila. He found Lila's official school portrait, her bright, defiant eyes staring out, and he found a photo of the new statue, the bronze monument to a monster. That Seth worked his magic, packaging it all into a single video file, designed to be uploaded remotely and override the stadium's system at the precise moment David gave the signal. The final piece of the puzzle was Helen. David met with her one last time. He told her the plan. He saw the terror in her eyes, but also a flicker of something else. A steely resolve. He will be there with his nurse, she said, her voice stronger than before. After he flips the switch for the scoreboard, they'll bring him to the center of the field for a final ovation. That's when you have to do it. When every eye in the stadium is on him. She paused, taking a deep breath. I will be there. I will stand up in the stands. When they see me, they will know it's the truth. The night of the kickoff classic, the air was electric. The stadium buzzed with the energy of 10,000 people. The scent of popcorn and cut grass, the roar of the crowd, the boom of the marching bandit was the heartbeat of the town. David sat in his car in the parking lot, his laptop open, a secure connection to Seth established. He had a clear view of the massive jumbotron that towered over the field. He watched as the ceremony began. The mayor gave a fawning speech. Mark Redfield, representing the Alumni Association, spoke glowingly of his mentor, his voice thick with a false sincerity that made David's skin crawl. And then, they brought him out, Marcus Albright. He was in a wheelchair, a blanket over his lap, an oxygen tube in his nose. He looked frail, diminished, but his eyes were still the same. Sharp, arrogant, scanning the adoring crowd. He was soaking it in his final moment of worship. They wheeled him to a large ceremonial switch. With a weak, trembling hand, he pushed the lever. The new scoreboard flickered to life, bathing the stadium in brilliant light. A message flashed across the screen. Thank you, Coach Albright. A legend forever. The crowd erupted. A standing ovation. 10,000 people cheering for a monster. They brought him to the 50-yard line, a single spotlight illuminating him. This was it. The moment of his triumph. David's hand hovered over the enter key on his laptop. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He took one last look at the crowd, at the sea of smiling, cheering faces. He was about to shatter their world. He was about to burn their temple to the ground. Don't let him win. He hit the key. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the jumbotron flickered. The tribute message vanished, replaced by a single, high-resolution image, Lila Chun's senior portrait. Her defiant, beautiful face, 20 feet high, looking down on the town that had forgotten her. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. People looked around, wondering if it was part of the tribute. Then, the sound came. Not the marching band, not the cheers, but a faint hiss. And then, a voice. Lila's voice, amplified through the stadium's massive sound system, echoing off the empty seats and the silent faces. He said, all great artists are born from pain, and he was going to be my crucible. The murmur died. A stunned, absolute silence fell over the stadium. On the screen, a page from her diary appeared. The Words, scrolling slowly as her voice continued to speak from the grave. On the field, Albright's head snapped up. His eyes, wide with shock and disbelief, stared at the giant image of the girl he had destroyed. Mark Redfield, standing near the sideline, froze, his face a mask of pure horror. Then Albright's voice, smooth and venomous, filled the stadium. "The girl you are must die so the artist can live." People in the stands gasped. They looked from the screen to the frail old man in the wheelchair, and back again. The photo of Albright, staring down at a sleeping Leela, flashed onto the Jumbotron. It was damning. It was irrefutable. The audio continued, a collage of their sessions. Lila's pleading, her fear, and Albright's cold, methodical, psychological torture. The conspiracy was no longer a secret, whispered in the dark. It was a public spectacle, a horror movie playing out in real time. Then, the final image appeared on the screen. The bronze statue. And the final audio played. The last entry from her diary, read by an actress with a voice that trembled with rage and sorrow. "My name is Leela Chen. Please, don't let me disappear." The video ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was the most profound, most terrifying sound David had ever heard. It was the sound of a town's soul breaking. Then, a single figure stood up in the VIP section. Helen Albright. She pulled the sunglasses from her face, and in the stark stadium light, everyone could see the tears streaming down her face. She just stood there, a silent, powerful confirmation of everything they had just heard. All eyes turned to the man in the wheelchair on the 50-yard line. Marcus Albright was hyperventilating, his chest heaving, his face a grotesque purple. He clawed at the oxygen tube in his nose, his eyes wild with a fury that was battling the cancer for control of his body. He tried to speak, to deny it, but all that came out was a strangled gurgling sound. He wasn't a god anymore. He was just a pathetic, dying old man, his crimes exposed in the most public, most humiliating way imaginable. Two police officers, their faces pale with shock, started walking slowly toward the field. The crowd remained frozen, a sea of horrified statues. The cinematic payoff was complete. It wasn't a courtroom verdict. It was something far more visceral. It was public shaming. It was viral justice. It was the complete and utter destruction of a myth. In the parking lot, David Chen closed his laptop. He didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel joy. He just felt the immense crushing weight of a promise finally kept. The aftermath was not a celebration, it was a funeral. A funeral for the town's innocence, for the lies it had told itself for 2 decades. The stadium emptied in a slow, silent, somber procession. There was no rage, no rioting, just a profound collective sense of shame. They had been duped. They had been willing accomplices. In their own deception, cheering for a monster while one of their own had been devoured. Marcus Albright did not get arrested. He had a massive stroke right there on the 50-yard line, the spotlight still on him as paramedics rushed the field. He was taken to the hospital, the same one with a wing named after him. And he died 3 days later without ever regaining consciousness. He died in disgrace, his name instantly transformed from a symbol of pride to a mark of infamy. The town council held an emergency meeting and voted to have the statue removed. It was gone before sunrise the next day. The concrete plinth left bare, and accusing Mark Redfield's life imploded. The video of his face, frozen in horror and guilt as the tapes played, went viral. His business collapsed overnight. His wife left him, taking the children. He became a pariah. The man who knew. The boy who chose the monster over the girl. The last David heard, he'd sold the dealership for pennies on the dollar and left town in the middle of the night, another ghost, fleeing the scene of the crime. David stayed for another week, a silent observer to the town's grief. He gave the diary, the tapes, and Leela's note to the state police. The case was officially reopened, and Leela Chen was reclassified from a runaway to a missing person, presumed homicide. They dredged the lake by the old boathouse, but they never found her. Albright had hidden his ultimate trophy too well. Before he left, David met Helen one last time. She was packing up her house, preparing to move closer to her sister in another state. She seemed lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I was so afraid for so long," she said, handing David a small box. "Afraid of him, afraid of the truth, but the truth, it's a relief in the end. A painful one, but a relief." David opened the box. Inside was Leela's diary. "The police have copies," Helen said. "I thought you should have the original. You're the one who gave her back her voice." He drove out of Northwood on a grey, overcast morning, the sky weeping a slow, steady drizzle. He didn't have a destination in mind, he just drove. He had won justice in its own brutal, messy way, had been served. But the victory felt hollow. The emotional echo of it all was a low, haunting hum in the back of his mind. A month later, he found himself in a small coastal town in Oregon, a place Lila had once written about in her diary, a place she'd dreamed of escaping to. He walked along the beach, the cold Pacific wind whipping at his face. He had quit his job. The law, with its neat rules and tidy precedents, felt like a foreign language to him now. He had spent his life in service to a system, and he had learned that the system was a fragile, corruptible thing. He found a small, windswept cemetery overlooking the ocean. He bought a simple, granite marker. He had it engraved. Leela Chen 198620003. Poet, artist, Phoenix. She did not disappear. He had no body to bury, but he placed the marker there anyway. A final act of remembrance, a testament that she had existed, that she had mattered. He sat there for a long time, the diary in his lap, watching the waves crash against the shore. He had kept his promise. He hadn't let them forget her. But the cost was a permanent sadness, a haunting awareness of the darkness that can hide behind the most celebrated smiles, and the ghosts that wait patiently in the attics of our lives for someone to finally let them speak. The ocean roared, a sound like a long, cathartic scream, and for the first time in 21 years, David Chen allowed himself to cry.